Let's begin with this piece. Now, this piece has a lot of history to it. The first part of the piece is really more how Reb Yaakov saw the machlokes between Eliyahu and Achav. Very interesting machlokes. And Reb Yaakov says a pshat that's, I don't think, the pasha pshat. We'll talk more about it. But then Reb Yaakov goes into history. He talks about the Chafetz Chaim. He talks about Reb David Leibovitz. And he connects it all with the ideas he's expressing over here. There's a great footnote where he talks about the Or Sameach, Ramei Simcha. So I wanted you to hear this because I heard a lot of this from Reb Yaakov. Dafka, the piece that it begins, I didn't hear from Reb Yaakov, but everything else I did. So he says like this.
So wait, you're reading Rabbi Shurin. You're reading from where exactly now?
It's Sefer Malachim, Beis,
Okay.
page Kuf Pei Aleph.
Okay.
Right, Kuf Pei Aleph, and it's Kuf Pei Aleph, Beis Yud Beis, right? Bet Yud Beis.
Okay.
Right. Velisha Rav who mitzaek Avi Rechav Yisrael ufarashav v'lo ra'o hu od vayichazik b'bgodav yikraim l'shnayim. So it says that Elisha saw Eliyahu, like, in the fiery chariot, and he saw him leaving, right? And he started screaming, Avi Rechav Yisrael ufarashav. My father, about Eliyahu. He is the Rechav Yisrael Farashav, and then he didn't see him, and when he didn't see him, he rent his garments. And Reb Yaakov goes on a Gemara here, which is not the Pasha Pshat. The Pasha Pshat is Avi is like just out of pain, he said it twice. That's the Pasha Pshat over here. Avi Rechav Yisrael Farashav means like when God calls to Avram, Moshe, right? He's calling, because he wants to be Mezarez them, right? So Avi is similar, not to be Mezarez, but it was similar that, my father is when you're in pain, you say it 2 times. That's the Pashat. The Gemara in Moed Katan says something different. The Gemara in Moed Katan, Chavav Amralf, Yalfinu Chiv Kriya al Aviv Ve'imo, V'rabo Mikan. The Mefarshinan, Kafel HaLashon, Kfel HaLashon, Avi Shezeu Aviv Ve'imo. The Gemara explains that Kafel HaLashon is Avi, my father, Shezeu Aviv Ve'imo. In other words, when it said Avi, it's extra, the second Avi, it means Imo. Okay, not clear at all where the Gemara is getting this from. It's just bothered with why it says it twice, Al Pi Drash. Like I said, Al Pi Pshat, it's just that he's screaming and wailing his hurt that Eliyahu was leaving. But the Gemara says that you learn from here, actually Rabbo is a little later in the pasuk, but Avimo you learn because he said Avi twice. V'tzorach bir, mahi hamashmut Eliyahu hanavi hayigam Abba gam imo shel klal Yisrael. So, in other words, Reb Yaakov is going on the Medrash. He's not questioning the Medrash. He's saying, according to the Medrash, that he's saying, my father, my mother, in what sense is Eliyahu a father? And what sense is he a mother that he's saying about Eliyahu, Avi, which means Avi the Imi, right? So that's what Reb Yaakov wants to know, right? And Reb Yaakov is also going to try to answer another question. The other question is, why is he screaming this b'chlal? Avi. What is he trying? What message is he trying to give to the Jewish people? Shalisha neschava lekach b'kavanoso b'chanoso et Eliyahu Avi. In other words, he wants to know what is the mashmaut of this. What is the message that Eliyahu Navi was Abba ve'ima shel klal Yisrael? That Elisha was mitchaven when he coined Eliyahu Avi, right? Again, he's going with the Medrash, and the Medrash, according to the Medrash, he means he was the father and mother of Klal Yisrael. V'nira lomar, Dinei la'el malachim aleph, Yud Ches, Yud Zayin Yud Ches, Vahi Kiraos Achav es Elio. Remember, Achav is looking for Elio. Why is he looking for Elio? Because he wants to stop the famine. And Elio is the one that decreed the famine, and the Jews are starving. The Jews are dying of lack of food and water. So he sent people out to look for Elio. Finally, Elio appears because God told him to appear, right? And when Achav sees Elio, Vayomer Achav Elav, Ha'ataze Ocher Yisrael, are you the Ocher Yisrael, the one who destroys Israel? Right? Vayomer Lo Acharti Es Yisrael Kiyam Ata Uveis Avicha, you are the one who destroys Israel, right? You and your father's home. Baz v'chem, right? Es mitzvahs Hashem v'telech achrei habalim. Baz v'chem es mitzvos Hashem means like you and your father. His father was Omri. Omri was there. That's the name no from Jews ever give, because his father was a Russia, but he built the capital of the Malchus called Shomron. Right, so he built that. Therefore, he had a schus because of that. The Gemara says, but he was a Rasha, Omri, and Achav was much more of a Rasha than his father. That's why we don't give that name. Whenever you see an Israeli Rosh Hashiva who has the name Omri, you know that he's a Baal Tshuva. Right? There's no way that you give that if you're from Bertha. Right? Kiyamato, base of, even though I think Ariel Sharon named one of his kids Omri. So there's a machlokes here. Who's the Ocher Yisrael? Achav says you're a destroyer of Israel, and Eliyahu says no, you and your father are the destroyers of Israel because you left his mitzvos. So the question is, what is the machlokes over here? Hine nechku Achav Eliyahu mia Ocher Sheli es Yisrael. So I'll tell you what the Pashup shot is. The Pashup shot is, this is the Abarbanel. He's the only one I think who discussed it. He says that Achav held, I don't have to look at anything but the symptom. The symptom is that the Jews are starving. And if it's because of you that they're starving, you're an Ocher Shel Yisrael. And Eliyahu is saying, no. You have to look at the reason for the symptom. The reason behind why they're starving because of you, because you have left God's mitzvos, and your father left God's mitzvos, and eventually God had to punish you. So that's the reason why you're an Ocher Shel Yisrael. So one is looking at the symptom, Achav is looking at the symptom, and Eliyahu is looking at the cause. Okay, that's the Pashup shot that the Abarbanel says, and I think the Metzudah David says it too. Reb Yaakov comes up with something a little bit, maybe you could say deeper or more sophisticated. Achav taught, right? Hishart the klal yisrael gimel shonim b'li ochel. Ve'en chadoi klal al gashmi shalahem. You have left the Jewish people without food and water for the last 3 years, and you don't worry about the gashmias. Ve'liyoana lo ki el ata achav achrei ala matzav. You're the reason for this situation. V'nei derech olam she'aba doeg l'ruchnius ve'ima l'gashmius. Reb Yaakov makes a klal here that's not so clear where that comes from, but he says that this is the derech olam, that the Abba worries about the ruchnius of the children, and the Ima worries about the gashmius. He's going to try to explain it. V'tomid yesh chichuch. There's always tension, right? Bein Abba le'ima. Kisha Abba doeg l'ruchnius al cheshbon agashmius. When the father is looking for ruchnius on the cheshbon of gashmius, umineged ha'ima doegus l'gashmius al cheshbon ruchnius. L'dugma, right? Yeled chotei v'Abba manisho so shelo yochal, right? The child did some damage in the house. He was a mazik. He had an ADHD child, right? And the father, right, gave him a punishment that you go to bed without supper tonight. You have to remember the old TV shows, that this sometimes happened on a TV show. Today, it could never happen.
You go right to jail. Right to jail.
Right. You would get a social worker coming in, and of course there would be a mishpat, and you go right to jail, right? Maybe only for a year, but you would go to jail. right? So the father gets angry and he judges the child, or he punishes the child, shouldn't he? And the mother comes and says, "What, are you out of your mind? That's not a punishment. You can't send a child who is hungry to bed." Right? So she is worrying about his gashmias, even though he did something terrible in the house. And the father is worried about the ruchnias. We have to teach him that this is asur to do. Umitzad sheni, ima midarbenes espana lechol al yidei iyom. A woman, the mother is, when she is worried about the gashmis of the child, so she motivates the child to eat by threatening him. A lot of times kids say, "Ma, I'm not hungry," right? I'm not hungry. They want to go out and play. The mother's afraid to let them go out without them eating. If the kid misses a meal, he may die, right? So the mother's worried about it. Imlo tochal et hamanashalcha eteno otal achicha. If you go out to play now, right? There's the food on the table, right? You want to go play, right? So your brother's going to eat it up. We're not going to wait for you. So she scares the kid into eating, right? She doesn't scare the kid into be a better Jew. She scares the kid into eating because that's her function. Her focus is on the eating. They should be healthy physically. Gashmias. And she doesn't care if she just sent a negative educational message to the child. Right? That's a negative thing that your brother's going to eat up your food. Right? It's not the best way to raise a child. This should bother you, that and it's not good midos to say that, we're going to focus, your brother, if you don't eat now, but the mother's desperate for eat. So sometimes she says things she shouldn't say, just like the father sometimes says things he shouldn't say as well. V'kachov and Achav, shehu ha'ima shel klal Yisrael. Achav claimed, we said Achav was looking at the symptom, right? Reb Yaakov doesn't exactly learn. He was certainly looking at the symptom. The Jews were starving. But he was looking at the symptom from an image of a mom, right? I'm worried about the Jewish people. It's not like Achav said, let them starve to death. Who cares? No. He took it very serious. He went looking for food and so on and so forth. And he was worried about their physical needs. But Eliyahu, right? Rak misnaheg ka'aba she'ena mitanyen begashmias. But Eliyahu is a midas hadin. He was looking, at the Jewish people and acting towards them like the father that doesn't worry about the gashmis of the son. He's always hitting the kid for not coming to minyan, for not waking up in time, for grabbing muktzah or something. He goes crazy over that, right? So Eliyahu was very much sensitive to the Jews doing the mitzvahs. And Achav is saying, I'm the mother here. You're the father in this position. I'm just worried they haven't eaten, right? And you're saying to me, well, why haven't they eaten? Because, they haven't been good Jews, right? So he says one was playing the father figure and one was playing the mother figure. Amalu Eliyahu, lo acharti Yisrael kiyamata. I didn't destroy Israel, rather you did. Hincha to'ek ki ani gam ima v'dol tavos magashmis. And here Reb Yaakov adds this and says Eliyahu was saying, I am also their mother. You think I'm only their father? I'm midas adin? No, I'm also midas harachamim. Ki ani gam doeg l'tovos agashmis rak lefamim yesh ima pikchit or pikachat, right? Shemevina shetzorach la'anish ha'yeled lo yochal v'zel l'tovaso. But there is sometimes a smart mother that understands, right, that a child sometimes, if they don't eat, it'll be better for them next time. Not necessarily to say to the child that your brother's going to eat it, but to leave the child not eating and they go to bed without food in order that they should realize that, now I have to know the consequences are I'm going to bed hungry. The mother will not do this often, but once in a while, just to teach the child, they'll do that. And Elio was saying to Achav, you're the one that has mechabel means to what's the English word? Chovel amazik, right? You're the one who has what's the word? What?
Damage.
It's a damage.
Damage, right? Every good part of Klal Yisrael, both Baruchnius and now even Bagashmius, because of the Ruchnius, I have to make an example in the Gashmius. That's why, according to the Gemara, what the Gemara is stressing is that Elisha, when Eliyahu died or left the world, he wanted Klal Yisrael to know that he's Avi and Imi shel Klal Yisrael. He's Abba ve'ima shel Klal Yisrael, because the Jews were saying he's Midas Adin. He doesn't care about the Gashmias. He only cares about the Ruchnias, right? So Elisha was saying this was answering up the machlokes, right, between Achav and Eliyahu. He was saying Achav accused Eliyahu of Midas Hadin and caring only what the father does, right? And came along Eliyahu, right? In other words, Elisha was saying Achav looks like he cared only about the Gashmis of Klal Yisrael, and Eliyahu didn't care about it, right? So he wanted to get rid of that taina of the Jewish people on Eliyahu, right? That he only cares about the Ruchnias, because a lot of times you see fathers only care about the Ruchnias of the child, not the Gashmis of the child, but really they have to be focusing on both. But Reb Yaakov says that the mother tends to worry about the Gashmias, and the father tends to worry about the Ruchnias, which there's some truth to that. Today, I think it's less true, but I think certainly when Reb Yaakov said this, it was more true probably in the 1960s or 70s. Right? It was more true that the father focused on the Ruchnias. Even, I'm talking, in the Frum homes, and the mother was focused more on the Gashmias. The mother was a homemaker. The father...
This is a chiddush of Rav Yaakov. Nobody else says this. So
that the Ruchnias versus Gashmias,
that the Avi is really okay. So they learned halachically.
No, Avi Ima. Was the Gemara says when he said Avi Rechav Yishol for Rashav, it meant Avi ve'imi.
Right.
Rabbi Yaakov was trying to explain why is the Gemara saying that? What's the important thing about it?
How do other people explain it?
So I said the Pashup shot. Oh, I never saw anyone explain this Gemara. I always had problems with it. Yeah, he's the only one I ever saw explain the Gemara as, he's trying to answer up the Jewish people's taina on Eliyahu. That Elisha says, I knew Eliyahu, and he was really Avi ve'imi. He was both a father and mother, but sometimes a mother, you guys have to understand, also makes you go to bed hungry, so you'll understand that you have to be careful to eat on time and come to the table and eat and not just take it for granted, right? So in that sense, that's what Eliyahu wanted. So now he goes on and he says something very interesting. This is his pshat, okay? He says like this, V'shnas Tofresh Tzadi Daled, in the year 1934, La'acha Sheniftar Chafetz Chaim, Nasasi, that's when the Chafetz Chaim died. I think 1933 or 34 is when he died.
33.
What?
It was 33.
33. So I don't know why it says here. It may be that he was masked with the Chafetz Chaim later. Not at the death, but later at a certain point when it was already. Do you know what month it was in 33?
I'll look it up in a second.
Okay. Because it seems like Reb Yaakov said,
Tofresh Tzadi Daled. It could have been the fall. It could have been after Rosh Hashanah.
Yeah. I'm saying after Rosh Hashanah, he was, but maybe he died in Elul. I don't know when he died. You know what I mean? I'm not sure, right? So I also remember that he died in 1933.
The 24th of Elul,
That makes now
1933.
it's perfect sense, right? He died 24th
1933.
of Elul, exactly. And 24th of Elul means, mamish, the day we start slichas, right?
Yeah.
So,
AI.
6 days, right? 6 days later, it's tough for Sadi Dalit already. So he's probably masbid him after the Shiva, okay? Or maybe after, by the Shloshim. Over Shnas, Tafresh Sadel, Lachash, Niftar, Chavetz Chaim, Nesotzi, Hespedalab, Mokum, Rabbanusi, B'Tzitivyan, where I was the rabbi in Tzitivyan in 1930. That was 1934. He didn't leave Tzitivyan until I think 37. Okay, I gave a hesped of the Chavetz Chaim B'Tzitivyan. Okay, B'Dvarim Halolo. Now take a look at the footnote 549. It says like this: Rabbeinu Siper. I heard this from Reb Yaakov. Kisheniftar hagoyin Reb Meir Simchon B'Dvinsk b'shnas Tafresh Pei Vav. He died in 1926. The Meshech Chochma, the Or Sameach. Lo nosalov hesped Tzitavyan. I didn't do a hesped for the Or Sameach. Shoisa Ayarak Tana. It was a small town, where I was the Rav, Girgish, she'ein ze lefi chvoda shel Rameir Simcha. It wasn't lefi kavod of Rameir Simcha. Now I want to tell you what this means. And you'll see, that's the way you have to learn Pshat in the Gemara and Ksuvas also. Rabbi Yaakov's going to quote. This is a footnote, but Rabbi Yaakov's the one who said this. So, Reb Yaakov, when Reb Yaakov told me I was maspid the Chavetz Chaim, you know why? Because I felt everybody could relate to the Chavetz Chaim. But Rameh Simcha, they couldn't relate to him. What they knew, the Balabatim in the city knew the Or Sameach al Rambam, right? They knew he had great chidushim al Rambam. By the way, the Meshech Chochmah was not printed till a year later. So even if Reb Yaakov wanted to mention the Meshech Chochmah, he couldn't. And I'm not sure that they could relate to the Meshech Chochmah either. It's a pretty sophisticated sefer. But certainly the Or Sameach on the Rambam, they couldn't. So Reb Yaakov said, I wasn't maspid him because they wouldn't understand who I'm talking about. With the Chavetz Chaim, everybody could relate to. Now take a look what Rabbi Yosef is recording here, is Kamenetsky. What does that mean? Ukadisa b'ksuvas kuf gimel abeisha tziv Rabbeinu HaKadosh. Rabbeinu HaKadosh commanded his students, Al tispeduni ba'ayaros. Don't be maspid me in the towns, only in the krachim, in the cities. V'savar minei mishum tirchahu the kamar. It's because they thought that to go through each city with his aron, he thought that as a tircha. That's what the Gemara thinks. Even the Chazid, the kamispedei bekrachim, but since they saw that they are, in other words, he saw that they were maspedim in the cities, not in the towns, but in the cities. It's because it's yakar, meaning for his covered in the cities. It's a big cover because it's a big city. Towns were not lefi chvoda to be master in a small town. Ayin sham. In other words, what Reb Yaakov was saying was to be maspid someone that nobody understands who they are. That's not lefi chvoda. In other words, if you don't know who the Or Sameach was and you can't appreciate his Or Sameach, you're not maspid in front of these people because they can't relate to the man. So therefore, that comes out. It's not lefi chvoda. What kind of cover are you doing for him to be maspid him in front of people who couldn't understand who he was? Right? Hispid. He did do as Chavetz Chaim deeper Talmud al Mashiach ukekohen hitkonen lasos et ha'avoda b'migdash. Chavetz Chaim would always talk about Mashiach, and as a kohen, he prepared himself for the avoda b'migdash. V'chein dorash me'akohanim achem sheyilmedu Dine Avodas HaMikdash. As you know, the Chavetz Chaim was very sensitive to Mashiach and the Beis HaMikdash, and he had people learning the Avodas HaMikdash. And when he, he lived a very long time. The Chavetz Chaim lived till in his 90s, which in those days was unheard of. In other words, Reb Yaakov, when I said to Reb Yaakov, when he hit 90, I said, Zaidi, you lived into your 90s. He says, that's no trick. The medication lived me into the 90s. That's what he said. The Chavetz Chaim didn't have medication. That was a tremendous trick to live into the 90s when there was no medication.
He was 95.
Don't forget. What?
He was 95.
Who, the Chavetz Chaim?
Yes.
Yeah, so Reb Yaakov was also 95 when he passed away, but in his early 90s, I already said to him, look, you're living so long. I said to Reb Yaakov, he said, it's no trick. I live on the medication. The Chavetz Chaim had no medication whatsoever because not only he lived, in the 1930s, but he didn't even live in a big city. He lived in Rodden. What medication did they have over there? Some Bubba mice that they had there as medication, So he didn't have that, but he still lived. So he said, that was a kunz, he said. Everybody thought that he's going to be Makal Pnei Mashiach. Why is he living so long? Obviously, because he's waiting for Mashiach to come. God's keeping him alive to be Makabel Panav Shel Mashiach. Ukeshameis Omar Rabbeinu, Reb Yosef Kamenetsky is writing, when he died, Reb Yaakov said, Rifya Nora, Shehirgish Rifya Nora, Ke'ilu Chavetz Chaim Poshan Es HaRegel. That Reb Yaakov felt that there became a very big letdown, right? And people were losing their emunah in Mashiach because the Chavetz Chaim passed away. He was Poshan Et HaRegel. V'choshev she'im kach, he argosha eitzlo vadi shekain he eitzlo amon ha'am. So since Reb Yaakov said, I felt that there was a Pashat Regel, meaning that I was very disappointed Mashiach had not come in the time of the Chavetz Chaim, and that weakens your emunah. He says, if I felt that way, vadi shekain he eitzlo amon ha'am. Certainly my balabatim felt that way. V'alkein hichlit la'aspid b'shvil chazek ha'emunah. Therefore, I decided to be maspid the Chavetz Chaim l'chazek emunah b'Mashiach. Now we don't have his hesped, but part of the hesped we have, because that's what Rabbi Yaakov was saying. In the hesped, I said the following thing. Go back up by the word Sitivyan. He says, I was maspid the Chavetz Chaim in Sitivyan, which Rabbi Yaakov said to me, because I felt everybody could relate to Chavetz Chaim, was true. No, Chavetz Chaim was a Mishnah Brura, right? Not everyone could relate to the Mishnah Brura. He had to be a little bit of a Talmud Chacham, but he also wrote many of the Svarim, the Chavetz Chaim, on Lashon Hara, right? Everybody was able to relate to the Chavetz Chaim, even whether he was a great giant for some people or whether he was a big tzaddik for others. A lot of people felt he was a tremendous tzaddik. That's why, let's say, the tzaddik of Yerushalayim, Rabbi Levine. Every Jew was able to relate to Rabbi Levine. They didn't know they didn't know his learning, that he really knew how to learn. They just knew him as a tzaddik. In the Chavetz Chaim, the same thing. They was a tzaddik. I don't know if I ever told you that when my mother was sitting Shiva for Rabbi Yaakov, so someone came in, a grandson of the Chavetz Chaim came in, who was very close with Rabbi Yaakov, right? So we started talking about the Chavetz Chaim. So he said over a story that someone once asked his father, who was the son-in-law of the Chavetz Chaim, right? What was his name? I forget the name of the son-in-law of the Chavetz Chaim, Menachem. I forget the name. So he said about his father, right? Someone asked his father, how come the Chavetz Chaim wasn't known as a huge Talmud Chacham? He wasn't like, everybody knew the Chavetz Chaim as a tzaddik, but of course they knew he knew how to learn. But he was really a huge Talmud Chacham. He knew Kol HaTorah Kula, He wrote Svarim on Kachim as well, Shonei Halachas on Kachim, he was on everything. He wrote Svarim. Anyway, so when they asked this guy's father, what is it? The Chavetz Chaim wasn't known as a great Talmud Chacham. He said, "Ritzon Yireh Yaseh." The will of God's fearers he does. The Chavetz Chaim didn't want anyone to know that he was a Talmud Chacham, right? So then the guy asked right? The guy asked his father, right? So why was Yeshver known as a tzaddik? Did he want to be known as a tzaddik? So it also should be Ritzon Yirei of Yasser. So he answered, the Chofetz Chaim didn't know he was a tzaddik. He knew he was a Talmid Chacham, so he said Ritzon Yirei of Yasser, but he didn't know he was a tzaddik. So he couldn't have Ritzon Yirei. So that's why they knew him as a tzaddik, right? But the Chofetz Chaim was known to Balabatim, right, as a tzaddik. I heard from somebody, Chofetz Chaim came to America, I don't know how many times, but one time he came to America and he was in Chicago. And a woman told me, she was not a educated woman. She was a Balash Tshuva. At the time when I knew her, she was in her 60s. She lived in Reb Yaakov with her husband, and they were Balei Tshuva. She says as a little girl, she remembers the Chofetz Chaim coming to Chicago, and everybody going to see the Chofetz Chaim. Right? Why? She said, I wasn't even from, but he was a holy man. Right, so that's what they related to the Chofetz Chaim. So she went to see the Chofetz Chaim, and she got a peek. From a window in the shul, she got a peek from outside the shul because it was crowded. She got a peek what he looks like. My father would have said probably that's why she became a Balash Tshuva, because she once saw the Chofetz Chaim. That's what he would have said. But in any event, the Chofetz Chaim was really known as a tzaddik, right? So he says like this, Reb Yaakov, I was maspid him, v'izbarti she'etzel ima yesh musag shel hargasha gam ma she'asechel lo mevin. By a mother, there's regesh that even that the seichel doesn't so much understand, right? Now the mother is more involved in regesh, and because why? Because she has a certain regesh that the seichel itself doesn't communicate with. It's a certain regesh that, I'll soon show you what Reb Yaakov said in Parsha Shmos. You'll see it a little bit better. But this is what he says about an ima, right? And then in the bottom, Reb Yaakov, in parentheses, recorded a story. Take a look at 550. Rabbeinu hidgim ad kama godel koach hargasha shel ima besifro besapro. Reb Yaakov showed how great hidgim doesn't mean showed. He gave an example, right? That how great is the koach hargasha of a mother when he told Shahayelo chaver nurim b'slabotka. He had a friend when they were learning in Slabotka. Shesiperlo, the friend told Reb Yaakov, Shetinach chashvu lemeis. When he was a little kid, they thought he had died. He probably had an illness. They thought he had died. V'nicho aviv ala ritzpat. The minig is to put a dead person on the floor. Kederach shosu lenifter. That's the derech what they do to a niftar. But nochachud od anashim shekulam savrukein. There were a number of people there, maybe a doctor or this, right? And they put the child on the floor because they thought he died. Now this child was Reb Yaakov's friend in Slabotka. Ulam imo shaisa oz beherayon. He said, my mother, who was then in Herayon, she was pregnant with a sibling of mine. She heard that they put him on the floor. She ran in. He's alive, the kid. Now, people in the room thought he died, so they put him down. The mother said he's alive, and they were matapel with him again, and he turns out he was alive. And he became Reb Yaakov's friend in Slabotka, and they were ready sort of to bury him. You have to remember that in those days, they pronounced death a little bit different than today. They didn't have the sophisticated equipment and stuff. So they probably felt his pulse, and maybe there was not much of a pulse and no pulse, right? But the mother came running in. So Reb Yaakov says, you see, the mother sometimes has a hargasha that even the doctor didn't have. Al-pi, his medical background. V'chavetz Chaim hayelo rak Abba shel Klal Yisrael, elagam ima. He was not only the Abba shel Klal Yisrael, also the Ima shel Klal Yisrael, meaning that you related to the Chofetz Chaim also as the mom. Umamele ergisha emuna, b'bias haMashiach nechleshes, and he felt the Chofetz Chaim that people are not having enough emuna in Mashiach, right? He felt that Inyan was getting very weak. Therefore, the Chavetz Chaim wanted to show everything is lamaisa, meaning it's real, this idea of Mashiach. You guys are weak in it, but it's real. And he said people should learn kachim. The Chavetz Chaim put a sefer out on Zvachim called Asifas Skenim. What does it mean? A whole bunch of svarim that wrote on Zvachim. He compiled them. We have it today also when people learn kachim, right? A whole bunch of svarim that he put together, that people should learn Zvachim and have Rishonim and Achronim on Zvachim. So he wrote a Hagdama to it called Torah Or, Sheitvis Bavarsha Tofresh Samach Beis, right? 20 years before he died. He was like probably in his 70s then. Ayin Shom Beperek Yud, She'inyan HaKorbanos V'limud HaIlchoseh Makarav Es Hagula. Chavetz Chaim tries to prove that when you learn the halachas of Gula, not the hashkafa of Gula, but the halachas of Gula, like, Binyan Beis HaMikdash, the halachas and Korbanos, it's Makarav Es Hagula. Ayin Shom Beperek Yud Beis, Bo Mavayar Maimer HaGemor, Shesholim Lo La'adim Lasid Lavo, Tzipita L'Yeshua. Okay, the Chavetz Chaim, if you look over there, I'm pretty sure you'll find it. I seem to remember Chavetz Chaim said, "Tzipita Yeshua." When they ask you in the next world, they can ask you Kavata Itam La Torah, right? Asakta B'Piri V'Rivya, Tzipita Yeshua. The Gemara in Shabbos. So Reb Chavetz Chaim learned Tzipita Yeshua means did I look out to the Yeshua? So you can learn it means that I have in hashkafa, that I have belief in Yeshua. The Chavetz Chaim said, no, tzipita means that you saw the Yeshua coming so much that you started learning kachim, right? That's what it means. You have to do something to show that you're mitzapel Yeshua. V'kasher yedidi mikol el kovna. And when my friend from Kol Kovner, Reb David HaKohen Leibovitz, who started the Yeshivas Chavetz Chaim in New York, in Queens, right? When my friend, Shayinecher Achiv Shel Chavetz Chaim, he was the grandson of the brother of the Chavetz Chaim, meaning Chavetz Chaim was his great uncle. He Giel Radin Lahavi et Mishpachto Lelita. He came to Radin to bring his mishpacha to Lita. Could be he had his family living in Radin, but he was a rav in a town nearby, and I don't know why he didn't move them there, but he says he got to Radin to bring his family to Lita, because he was a rav, I think, in Poland, at least the area was the border of Poland. When he decided to go back, he was a rav already, and he decided to become a kollel guy, because they opened up a kollel in Kovna, about 13 guys. Reb Ruderman was in that kollel, Reb Yaakov was in that kollel, and a few other great Gedolei Torah. Nitfal yedei dodo HaChavetz Chaim lishaer b'kollel kachim shebaradin. Okay, it's not clear to me exactly why he went back to Radin, maybe to say goodbye to his great uncle. I'm not sure exactly. It seems that he had his family there. So the Chavetz Chaim demanded that he remain in the kollel in Radin, the kollel kachim. Chavetz Chaim made a kollel kachim in Radin to learn about the Beis HaMikdash and Korbanot. And he said to his great nephew, "Where are you going to Kovna? You have to stay here. You're a Kohen." Right? He's a son, a grandson of the Chavetz Chaim's brother. Chavetz Chaim was a Kohen. So he said, "You're a Kohen, so where are you going? You have to learn kachim." Sharehu Kohen, v'chayev hu ladas, ketzad lasos da'avoda kedasu gedin. Right? The Chavetz Chaim told him, stay here, forget about the kollel in Kovna, and stay here, learn about what you need to know as a Kohen. V'alkein, olav lamshich l'lmod kachim. He should continue learning kachim, and he should not go to Kovna. V'analo Reb David shebekovna lom de Masechta Shabbos. Right? He said, I'm going to Kovna Kol because they're learning Masechta Shabbos, which you could see they actually produced a pamphlet, a little not a pamphlet, but not a book, but of all the people in the Kol wrote on Masechta Shabbos. Reb Yaakov wrote, and David Leibowitz wrote. V'zeh kodem lekotchim. What he said to the Chavetz Chaim, uncle, right? He said, I'm going to learn Shabbos, which comes before Kotchim. Why? Ki im yavo echad lebeis hamikdash im korban chatas b'shvil shechil Shabbos tzarich ladat im be'emes chayev chatas ve'in zechulim ba'azara. You have to know when the guy comes, he says, "I'm coming to bring a chatas, right? Because I did an avera b'shogeg." You have to know it was really b'shogeg. Right? You have to know what's a shogeg and what's misaseg, right? I have to learn Shabbos to know that it's a real korban and it's not chulin bazara. So knowing before you bring the korban whether you mechal Shabbos, you have to know how you mechal Shabbos. Was it mezid? Was it b'shogeg? Was it misaseg? In bemes chayev chatas veins a chulin bazara. V'al kain tzorach lilmod Shabbos heitev. Therefore, I have to go to the Kol Covenant to learn Shabbos. Comes along the Chavetz Chaim and said, "Ulam Chavetz Chaim Yeshiv." The Chavetz Chaim had a good answer. Al zeh yesh kvar Mishnah Brura. I already wrote a Mishnah Brura. You can learn of Hilchos Shabbos in the Mishnah Brura. You don't have to worry about that. But Kotchim, there's no Psak Halacha written on Kotchim yet, right? So, I said Shonei Halacha. It's Likutei Halachas that he wrote on Kotchim. He wrote Psak Halacha of different karbonas and different things at the base of Migdash in Likutei Halachot, right? So over here, the Chavetz Chaim said to him, on that you have a Mishnah Brura, you don't have to worry. So you should stay here and learn Kotchim because you're a Kohen. So that's what.
Is this why Briskers learn Kotchim?
That's a good question. It's not so clear to me. You have to ask the Brisker. They'll know why the Brisker Rav started it when he came to Israel, right? It's not so. It could be just because he came to Israel he decided to learn Kotchim. I don't know, but I would like to say that, but I'm not sure. I've never heard people say that the Brisker learned Kotchim for this reason, right? Mm-hmm. But clearly the Chavetz Chaim did, and Reb Yaakov felt when the Chavetz Chaim passed away that people were let down. They thought he was going to meet Mashiach. Again, he would have been the one to meet Mashiach because he was loved by everybody. He wasn't, even though he was an agudist, but everybody loved the Chavetz Chaim. No one had a bad word to say about the Chavetz Chaim, whether he was a agudist or a mizrachist, right? He loved. That's why I want to tell you that when Rav Henkin, Zichrono Livracha, died in America, it was probably 1976. You could probably look it up, right? He was also in his mid to late 90s. And Reb Yaakov was convinced that he was going to greet Mashiach. Why? Because he wasn't shaykh to any group. He never went to Agudah convention. He never went to Mizrahi convention. He was a Jew that everybody loved, right? He was a gigantic posek, right? He was a big gaon. He was also a great tzaddik. Right? You read about his biography, you'll see he was a very big tzaddik. So at the Levaya, I heard Reb Yaakov speak, Reb Moshe spoke, Reb Yaakov started to cry at the Levaya, and he said, I was sure that you're going to be the one, Kabel Pnei Mashiach, that of all of us, you would be the one to Kabel Pnei Mashiach. And Reb Yaakov said it a few times. And at one point, Reb Yaakov said it angrily. He said, "You were supposed to live on, and our Averis caused it. You were supposed to live on and be Makabel Mashiach." That's what he said about Rav Henkin. I was shocked. I didn't know Rav Henkin very well. I knew he was a tzaddik, but I never met him. My father used to meet him, but I never met him. But I was shocked that Reb Yaakov was so disappointed, right? Because Reb Yaakov also thought he's going to live to Mashiach. Reb Yaakov thought that he was going to live to Mashiach, but didn't go, he thought, right? Anyway, but that's the piece over here that Reb Yaakov always said about the Chavetz Chaim, that the Chavetz Chaim was not only the Abba Shel Klal Yisrael, he was the Ima Shel Klal Yisrael. Everybody was able to relate to him, and he had in other words, he says the Ima has Yesh Musak Shel Hargosha Gam Masha Seichel Lo Mevin. Right? And the Chavetz Chaim had argosha that people are not thinking about Mashiach enough. He had that hargosha, right? I just wanted to end maybe with saying that the source I gave you in in Shmos, you could take a look at it, raises the question, how is it possible that Miriam knew better about Klal Yisrael's future than Amram, her father, was the Gadol Adar? Reb Yaakov raised the question because it says that she said to her father, you're wrong for divorcing mother because you're worse than Paro, because Paro goes al Zcharim and your goes on the Zcharim and the Kavos, right? She gave her father Musar and he remarried Yocheved, right? The Gemara in Sota says. So Reb Yaakov says, how's it possible that Miriam, right, had a greater insight into the future of Klal Yisrael than Amram, the Gadol Hadar? So he says over there, the Yeshom, what? Oh, so Reb Yaakov, he's what he called? He's bavards it. He bavards it. He says, because mashmal halasha nevuah shenisnaba v'omeres asida imi shetelet ben shemoshiach Yisrael niba acharkach al mitchila boy love rak besvara zu shezkiru chazal. Right? In other words, that nevuah happened later after his mother was pregnant already. It's Masha from the Gemara, at least, he says in Sota, and Yud Beis over Beis. So what does it mean that the Chazal was saying that she came with a svara? So that's what he says over here. There's no way to understand this. There's no place for hope. Avol bina yisera nitna la leisha yos min haish kmo shenemar v'natzelo bina zu eina mitchasheves im kloli v'gidrei haseichel. Rabbi Yaakov has a chiddush here that this bina does not connect itself to the kloli and gidrei haseichel. El margishos heina ki ein ze boru shegam hagzera tekayim. She feels that it's not true, that the gzera doesn't have to come into being. Right? It's a feeling, but that's what the woman has. Bina Yisera. That's called Bina Yisera, that she has not just a deeper understanding. A deeper understanding doesn't come from Seichel. It comes from a Regish. And that's what Reb Yaakov was talking about the whole time. The Chafetz Chaim had the Ima quality too, that he had a Regish that we have to start dealing more with Mashiach because people, he feels, don't have enough emuna in that. Now, I had written to Rabbi Yosef once, because he doesn't record this thing in Shmos. I said, maybe it's only by a mother, Reb Yaakov was saying, but here he seems to say it even by every woman. So Reb Yaakov Kamenetsky said to me, I believe you're right, that it's not only by a mother, it's by every woman also that this is true. Even though he's writing by the Chafetz Chaim, he's writing because he was the mother, he had this. He wasn't operating only on Seichel, but on Regish. Chafetz Chaim had that as well, but he says it's probably true about every woman as well. So that's why I brought this piece to say that Reb Yaakov has a chiddush that sometimes the correct answer is not pure seichel; it's regish too, as part of the answer. Okay, we'll stop here, guys. So we'll take it up in 3 weeks because the next 2 weeks I'm going to be traveling for the yeshiva, and then I'm going to be traveling home.
Enjoy the wedding.
Okay, thank you very much.
Watch your leg when you're dancing.
Yeah, I'm gonna dance a little bit because I'm gonna watch my leg. Okay.
Okay, take care.
Okay.
Take care. Bye-bye.